Salut French students, welcome to the third video for chapitre 3, the last chapter, as you know that we're going to be studying in our French 101 class. So in video 3, we're going to be learning a little bit more about numbers over 100, so les nombres au-dessus de 100. Okay, au-dessus means above, so numbers above 100. So we have a list of some of the numbers beginning with 100 and going all the way up to 1 million. So you already know that the number for 100 is 100. Okay, so you have a nasal vowel in the middle and a silent T at the end. So again, that is 100. When you add the number 1 to it, then we're going to make a liaison and it becomes 101. Okay, and then we move on to 102. Okay, and we notice we have a liaison because the T becomes before un, which begins with a vowel. When we go all the way up to 199, it is then 199. 99, if you break it down, 80 is 80, and then 19 is 19, and when you add them together, you get 99, so 199. Okay, 200 then would be 200. And notice that when we have 200 by itself without any other numbers following it, it has an S on the end to indicate that it's plural. But as soon as you add another number after that, we no longer have the S. It becomes 200, and you have the liaison there between the T and the U that follows it. And then we move up to the next big number, which would be 1000. Okay, and notice the way these numbers are written. It has a space between the 1 and the 3 zeros that follow. In some cases, there may be a comma there. It really just depends on which country we're talking about. Okay, and then when we add 1 to it, it's 1001. When we have kind of a mixed up number like 1352, that becomes 1352. So we have 1000 for 1000, 300 is 300, and then 52, is 52. So 1352. Okay, and when we move up to 2000, then we have 2000. Except that with 1000, we never add on any numbers to that, or I mean any plural S to that. It just stays as it is. So these are some little rules that you have to remember with numbers. Then moving up to the next big number, 602,511. So this would be 602,511. So it's 600, so 600, 2000, 2000, 500, 500, 11 is 11. Now put it all together and we get that big number. And then finally for 1 million, we say 1 million, 1 million. All right, so let's go a little bit further with numbers. Okay, so with 100 and with 1000, we don't need to use any article like un, because 100 already means 100 and 1000 already means 1000. So the only one that we do need to add an article before would be million. So it's 1 million. And then when you're counting things with numbers like 100 and 1000 and 1 million, okay, with 100 and 1000, you don't need to add anything else after those. You just basically say 100 habitants. There's a liaison between these two. So 100 inhabitants. 1000 habitants, 1000 inhabitants. And 1 million d'habitants. So when you have 1 million, you're using de to say basically a million of those people. 1 million d'habitants. So that's just the rule that we follow for those particular numbers. Okay, we saw this in the previous slide that with 100, it only takes an S if it's not followed by something else. So we have 200 habitants. Okay, and there's no other number following 100, so we put the S on it. But if there is a number following it, like in the case of 250, then we remove the S, so $250. Okay, with 1000, and we're never going to add any S to 1000, so 5000 habitants, 5050 habitants, so it's 5,000 inhabitants or 5,050 inhabitants. And then finally, as we've already seen with 1 million, we're going to use de to show that we have 1 million inhabitants, and the same thing if we have 5 millions d'habitants. 5 million inhabitants. So there are some kind of particular little rules to follow about when to use S, when to use de to follow the number of things that comes after that. Okay, so in here, this slide is just a little bit about punctuation with numbers. So generally, you're not going to use a hyphen like you would with some smaller numbers between 100, 1000, or 1 million and another number. And that's the system that our textbook follows. So if you have a really big number, like 1,003,545 habitants, okay, we don't have any hyphens with that big long number. And that number turns out to be 1 million, so 1 million, 3,000, 3,000, 545 habitants. So 545. So 1,003,545. Okay, and in France and in Quebec, a comma is used to denote decimals. So instead of the decimal that we would use here in the United States for 1.5, for example, in France or in Quebec, they would use a comma. And a comma in French is called 1,5. Okay, and 1000, okay, would be with the space, as we saw on the previous slide, or with a period. And I've seen both ways. Okay, one last item to look at with numbers, les nombres ordinaux. Okay, so in English, you might know about cardinal numbers or ordinal numbers. So cardinal numbers are basically the digits, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Okay, ordinal numbers are going to be like first, second, third, fourth, fifth, etc. And those are the numbers we would use to talk about the floors of a building. And we do the same thing in English too, so this isn't really any different. So we might ask the question, à quel étage? So what floor are we talking about? And when you want to say on a certain floor, you use au. Okay, so if we were to ask the question, à quel étage habitez-vous? Okay, what floor do you live on? A response might be, j'habite au troisième étage. So I live on the third floor. So au is taking the place of on the in English. Okay, I could say, j'habite au rez-de-chaussée. Remember that rez-de-chaussée is the first floor, the ground floor of a building, what we would call the first floor in English in the United States. Okay, I could say, j'habite au quatrième étage. I live on the fourth floor, which would actually be the fifth floor if you were in France. At least it would be the fifth floor to us. Okay, and to convert cardinal numbers like 2, 3, 4, etc. to ordinal numbers, you're going to add this suffix iem. So de becomes deuxième, and you add the little accent there. Quatre becomes quatrième. Mille becomes millième, like the 1000th. Okay, there are a few irregulars, a couple of irregulars here. Premier, which means first, becomes première. Okay, and that's a feminine form. Okay, cinquième or neuvième. Okay, just like we say, il est 9 heures. There you don't change the F to a V for the spelling, but here we do. We actually change the F to a V to reflect the pronunciation. Okay, so that's a little bit about numbers, and I hope you have fun playing with all these huge numbers and learning to put them all together. You'll probably, at this stage of your French learning, use the smaller numbers a lot more than you'll use the larger numbers, but little by little, we're piecing together all of our knowledge in this language. So I hope you have a great evening. Bonne nuit!